Welcome to the Integrated Schools Podcast. I'm Andrew, a white dad from Denver.
And I'm Val, a black mom from North Carolina.
This is Gratitude and Validation, one family's journey through integrated schools. Val, we are back. It is 2025.
It's going to be a big year, and there's going to be lots of decisions that we get to make as a community about how we want to stick together.
Yes, and I think that idea of sticking together is so important because there will be lots of things that happen over the course of this year and maybe the next couple of years that try to drive us apart. And I think that finding ways to be in community, finding ways to stick together is going to be really important.
And that's my preference, right? My preference is that we do all of this work together. And so I trust that you and I will certainly find ways, and we want to encourage our listeners to do the same.
Absolutely. And so we thought, as a way to kick off this year, what better way than to elevate a voice of somebody who has been a part of the community for a long time. Listeners may remember Susan from Lancaster sent us a voice memo that we played on the last episode of season 10. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
Hey, this is Susan calling from Lancaster, PA, and I just wanted to let you know that our children are now older and in high school. I had a really amazing moment the other day where my son randomly said, "Thank you guys so much for sending me to the school district because I wouldn't want to go to any other school in this county." He's on a sports team and he goes to schools all over the county and sometimes beyond. And he can't stop commenting about, how white the schools are and how awful he feels like it would be to go to those schools. And it's just interesting now that our kids are getting older and they have thoughts and opinions about our decisions that we made for them. And then thanking us for the decision. Like, it really was such a validation. He's gone to the school district, which is still, after all these years, only 11% white. And I think that parents who are going through that decision, it might be interesting for them to hear from kids themselves now whose parents made that decision and how much it's impacted them.
So we also thought it would be interesting to hear from Susan and her son, Elias, and they were willing to come on and share with us. Susan is sort of the quintessential person who connects with integrated schools, reached out, wanted to get in touch, joined a book club, I think, then eventually decided she wanted to start a chapter in Lancaster to organize other parents who are having these conversations. She wrote a blog post for our website, and now here she is being featured on a podcast episode.
Yeah, I think her story just speaks to how Susan acted on the desire to find community in this space.
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't just about waiting for it to happen. Like, she actively sought it and actively took the next steps to make sure that she was invested in her community and that she could create this sense of community for others. And so don't wait around, folks. It's on you.
That's right. We need community now more than ever. Local community, organizing, connecting locally is going to be such a big part, I think, of the next couple of years. And so I think Susan provides a great example of how you can do that. And if you are wondering where to start on that journey of finding community, of getting closer connected to integrated schools as an organization, we have a free guide. There'll be a link in the show notes, Helping Your Children Thrive Without Perpetuating School Segregation, a starting guide for socially conscious parents. We will send you a list of free resources, a link to communities, to ways to get connected to us. So if you're wondering how to get started, get connected the way that Susan did, that's a great place to start.
Yeah. But as much as I love Susan, that Elias.
Oh, man. I'm so excited for listeners to get to know Elias, her son.
I am too.
15 years old. He's a sophomore. He's gone to integrating schools basically since kindergarten and has just such a great perspective on it, has clearly thought deeply about it. They've had lots of conversations. And yeah, I think listeners are going to really enjoy getting to hear from him.
Yeah, we're so excited for this episode. We're so excited that you're joining us this year. Thank you in advance for all that you do. And we encourage you to keep doing that work out in your communities. And without further ado, Susan and Elias.
All right.
My name is Elias. I'm a white student at a predominantly Black and Latinx school, and I'm a sophomore.
My name is Susan, and I am a white mom. We live in a town called Lancaster in central Pennsylvania, about an hour and a half west of Philadelphia.
Awesome.
Susan, when did you come across integrated schools? How did you find the organization, and why were you looking for us?
I will never forget, we were going somewhere and I had picked up the New York Times and I was looking at the article of the New York Times Magazine. It was Nicole Hannah-Jones, and the title of the article was Choosing a School for My Daughter in a Segregated City. I think that was the title of it. And I was so wrapped with the article. I took the article with us in the car, and it was just a really like life-changing moment for me. And I remember thinking like all the things she was talking about in that article, those were things I was thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I had never heard anybody articulate them. At that time, Elias was 5 and we were going through that exact process. So as she was kind of explaining the process of choosing a school in an environment like that, we had been doing a similar thing as white parents, you know, in this predominantly Black and Latinx school district. And it was just a moment where it felt like such a relief to see this written on paper and have somebody call it out and name the thing that I had been struggling with internally. But now it was like in the New York Times. So it felt really legitimate and I had words for it. And so I remember like the word integration sticking in my head. And when I got back home, I was like, this is the thing. It's integration. I have to like look this up. It just started me on this path of like looking online, and I found integrated schools almost immediately. And it was like all these things started coming together at once, you know, like having a 5-year-old and thinking about the conversations that we were having at that time with parents, but feeling like something was really off with the things that we were hearing about the local school district. And then I, you know, just started listening to all the podcasts, and then it all came together.
If you go back another step, like what in your background or your upbringing, why did it not feel right to you? Why were the messages you were getting about the school, why weren't they sitting right with you and your husband?
So my background is in social work. And as a social worker, just part of our training and our studies are around, you know, breaking down systemic barriers for people that they face. Like that's a core tenet of the social work practice. And I was drawn to the social work practice for that reason. I've always been a social worker working with children and families, and mostly undocumented immigrants who were the majority of my caseload. So I developed relationships with these people and cared for them and just was in relationship with them, right? So I was already grounded, though, in that framework of looking at systems and how they oppress people. So that's kind of how I was trained, and I'm forever grateful for my profession because it did help me shape my worldview. So then we had our own child, right? And then you're in a system.
Right.
And then you're starting to see how those systems operate. But I think what's interesting is that I was very close to like getting pulled into the current, you know, of the narrative that we all talk about. It's kind of frightening how close we were to falling into it. And I know that we reference Nicole Hannah-Jones in her article a lot, but I think for a lot of us here in this community, she really was a light, you know, and for a lot of parents with privilege, and especially white parents with privilege, what she was writing about really like touched on something that I hadn't heard before, but as a social worker definitely resonated. And then looking at my child and saying like, how can I be a social worker with these values, with this kind of framework of the world and what we're trying to do as a profession, right? And then I have my own child, and then why would I go against that? But I have to tell you that like the narrative was so strong that even with that background, I was almost in the river. My husband and I were almost in that river, but I swear that article was like, come on out, like, come on. We got to get out of there.
It's worth swimming. Yeah. 100%.
You know? So,
Man,
yeah.
That's special.
Yeah.
Elias, tell us about school. Tell us about your school.
It's a great place. Like when I think of diversity, that's what I think of my school, right? Like there is like a sprinkling of white kids. There's a sprinkling of Asian kids, but it's mostly Latinx. It's mostly, you know, Black kids. There's refugees, right? And, you know, there's even kids from like Nepal that are in the school, right?
There's like 40 languages spoken.
Yeah, it's just this huge, like, just melting pot of all kinds of people and cultures. Yeah. You know, and even if you wanted to get into like LGBTQ people, right? Like there's, you know, it's just like there's everybody at my school. Yeah. And I think it's actually a phenomenon like you don't see much like in America from what I can tell. This is like something that's in this area unique to this district. And I think that's something that is special.
What do you think the impact of that has been on you?
You know, if I were to go to a prep school that's predominantly white, you grow up with being around wealthy white people. Well, you know, I still know wealthy white people. I'm mostly around people who are not wealthy and not white, right? And so it teaches you this whole new perspective on things and how people see the world, and also what's going on in other communities. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really been like a really good experience, because it's just allowed me to see a perspective that's not just from my own. Like, it's allowed me to meet a ton of new people.
That's dope.
That's really cool.
We had this moment not that long ago where I think back to where we were when you were little and the things that we were hearing. And all I wanted was like a crystal ball, like every parent. You just want a crystal ball to be like, show me what this is going to be like in 15 years. Like, you want to hear the stories. You want to hear how this goes, right? Because if you were believing everything you were hearing, oh my God, you know, he wouldn't even be here right now.
He's going to be ruined. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So I just think it's an interesting spot to be in at this point in the journey, and being like, yeah, it's all right. I think you're turning out okay.
So far. So, I mean, yeah, there's still
so
time.
far.
Better
So
than
far.
okay.
There's still time.
Okay. Better than okay.
Give us the lay of the land of Lancaster a little bit. What do the schools look like in general? What's the white parenting technique to either hoard opportunity or opt out? How do things typically play out?
Yeah. So Lancaster City is about 60,000 people. I think it's a very unique location because Lancaster is known for its like more rural kind of Amish population. And before we moved here, that's kind of how I visualized it. And when we moved, I was quickly struck by how diverse the actual city of Lancaster is.
Right.
There is a large African-American population that has been here for centuries. There is a very large Puerto Rican population that has been here for decades. And then more recently, we are known as the refugee capital of the United States. So we actually have like a really large population of refugee families. So I think it's 40% Latino. I want to say about 40% white, 13% Black. And then there's like a small proportion that's Asian and other like mixed race. Yeah. So the actual city is super, super diverse in the midst of this really rural, very conservative area of Pennsylvania. So it's a very unique place, but not surprisingly, like our school district does not reflect the population of the city. So our school district is actually 60% Latino, primarily those of Puerto Rican descent. And then we are 17% African American. I think we're 12% white, and the rest is Asian or other race. And then the other thing about our school district is that it's primarily low socioeconomic status. I think 85% of our school population is at or below the federal poverty level.
Where do all the white kids go? We see it in every city, but every city has like a slightly different version of how it plays out.
Right. Here it's predominantly private schools.
Yeah.
There's three big ones. Mm-hmm. There's a Catholic one, there's a prep one, and then just like an independent one. Mm-hmm. I think most of the white parents in Lancaster County are going to be at like surrounding school districts, like not the city district.
Right.
Around it.
It's predominantly white or like white families around us. So I think that's another thing that we see is people moving out to the suburbs when their kids get to be school aged.
Where there's like no Black families out there. Like,
right.
There are some.
You know,
Let's talk about elementary school. Where did you end up going? What were the demographics of that school like? How did that decision come to be? I'm guessing that Elias, you didn't have much say in your elementary school experience.
I did not.
You're like, I'm trying to listen to Nicole Hannah-Jones too.
Whether he wanted to or not, he was going to.
Yeah.
Bedtime story.
Yeah. The 1619 Project every night before bed. Yeah.
Right.
Once upon a time.
Yeah, so elementary school, we were coming from a school in our city, which, like, long story short, wasn't a good fit, right?
It was a Montessori.
It was a Montessori school. It just wasn't, like, good for me, you know. Like, the teachers didn't like me, you know, in the end. Like, I don't know what I did, but, you know, they just didn't like me, and I frankly didn't like them. So
the feeling was mutual. So
yeah,
that's right.
It was like hippie white parents, right? Like they weren't all rich. They were just really, really hippie. So we went to this new school, and it was almost like a breath of fresh air for me, because like the teachers, they had so many kids, like they don't care if you're like pretending to be Batman and like it's too violent or whatever. Well, I still like my teachers and I still got to know them very well, right? Well, I learned, oh wow, I'm not the center of those teachers' attention all the time anymore. And that's something, important to learn, I think. Like if you go working in an office, right? Like just because you're working in a cubicle, like there's 50 other people working in a cubicle, the boss isn't going to pay attention just to you or just to one of them.
Life skill, working. I like that.
Right.
Yeah. That's
And
true.
so
I didn't think about that one.
I learned that at a very young age in the school district.
I don't think you all, maybe you do, realize like just how profound like this part of the conversation is, because what you're talking about, I think, is really important for privileged parents and white parents to hear, because we have done a really good job in this country of centering white and privileged people.
Yeah, for sure.
And to hear like there are also other people or have equal value in the world, I think is not a lesson that people necessarily get as early as you got that. It's like I'm just sitting here, like my mind is just blown, because I didn't see that coming as one of your lessons, right? And I didn't even know it was a lesson that could happen as a result of going to an integrated school. I thought more of along the lines of the value of being in a place with lots of different perspectives. I didn't think about the impact of not being centered as one of the significant lessons.
Yeah, that's something we always struggled with, right? With a lot of those other schools was that.
Yeah. And I think, in fact, like as a white person, you probably should learn not to be centered, because
the whole thing is set up for you.
It's set up for you to succeed. And, I think that's really good to learn. In kindergarten, like we were all just hanging around white people. And so it was time to color. There was like the tan peach colored crayons. So we said, pass me the skin color. Right? Because it was what we knew. And by first grade, I was no longer saying, pass me the skin color. I was like, this is not the skin color, right? There's more. Like the new norm was there's tons of, skin colors.
Right.
It could be, including orange apparently. But who knows?
Who knew?
But
Who knew?
That didn't surface into a couple years later.
Yeah, that's a more recent one. But
this is the best interview ever.
Were there things that you missed out on at that elementary school that other people in your sort of social circles were getting at their, staying at the Montessori school or going to the prep schools or whatever? Were there things that felt like you were giving up in exchange for these important life lessons?
So I think like the Montessori school, it's definitely like has this like idea of like independence, right? Being able to choose what you want and, select where you want to go. The independence there, like some people might think you're losing by sending your kid, to a school with a set curriculum, like that you have to learn. You're like, I don't think that's true, right? Like you can still build a sense of individuality. It's a very diverse school that's prime time for building that individuality, right? Like this is who I am. And it's even more meaningful, I think, in a way. You have something even more to add to this new community that you're part of.
We know a lot of families who continue to send their children to that school. And I think it's an interesting question. Like, do you feel like the kids who now, interestingly, that school only goes to 8th grade, so a lot of them funnel into our high school. But do you feel like those kids that went there, or even the kids that who have gone to like the other, predominantly white schools in our city, like, do you feel like they're getting something that you haven't been? Like, do you feel like you're missing out on something?
I don't think so.
So I always believe that white students who go to predominantly Black and brown schools do have the ability to break out of that mold that is whiteness. I feel like white kids in a predominantly white school feel like they have to subscribe to whiteness. But if you go to a diverse school already, then I feel like you can possibly be more of yourself, because you aren't only supposed to be a certain way, wear a certain brand, do certain things that are aligned with whiteness. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true, because, obviously with all of those people comes all this culture, right? And that definitely, influences who you are, how you think, how you view the world. I think that is like 100% true. Like you are able to break out of this like stereotypical mold of being like a privileged white person, right?
The second episode ever of the podcast was the Borden family from Minnesota.
I remember that.
Right?
Yes, that was very important. That was a very important episode.
And Summer Borden, who was a I think she had actually just graduated. She was like a freshman in college at the time, but she had said something to her parents. They had moved from an almost all white school to an integrating school, and she said she just felt like there were so many more ways to be. That at her old all-white school, there was only one way to be. And at this new school, like the possibility of ways you could be had just expanded so much, and that she really appreciated that. That was a great episode.
Yeah, no, 100%. It opens up just like so many doors. Because like really, if you are just spending time with one kind of person, you're going to only see that one kind of person rather than seeing all these different kinds of people. Right, in this very open, accepting community.
I'm glad to hear that you have been accepted.
I think what you're touching on, Val, is like, that was my experience growing up, right? Like, I think for like so many white people, I mean, the vast majority of us, right, were like raised in these bubbles where it was like, this is your religion. This is what you're going to do. This is how you're going to be in the world. That was a hope of ours too, was to offer a different way to be white in the world.
Yeah.
You know, there are different ways we can do this.
Totally.
How are you going to do that if you're not in a system that isn't completely set up for it?
It's like, you know, like what I always like to think about. It's like, you know, it's like, oh, well, the civil rights movement ended everything. I'm like, you know, but did it? Right? Because there's still just white people that just clump together, right? And it's completely separate. And I think like in going to the school, I've learned, you know, maybe that's not the best way of doing things, right? Maybe you can't always just, you know, go home and hunker down in your boat. Maybe you actually have to go out into the world and, you know, be with people.
That's what's up.
Talk about middle school. Did you have a little more say in the middle school process?
No, I don't really have any say in any of it. Just kind of go along.
You knew there was not a choice.
Yeah.
There was never going to be a choice.
By that rate, the fire had been lit in my mom's heart. You're like, you're going to a public school.
Well, and I think middle school is that time, right? Okay, so with our school district, like you have your neighborhood school, and we do live in a predominantly white neighborhood, and our city is very segregated. And then middle school, you start getting, I can't remember, 4 or 5 elementary schools into one. So that's when things became even more integrated, was in middle school. But that's subsequently also when we saw people that we knew being like, you know what? I think I'm going to skip out of this. Yep. Like, maybe we'll see it back in high school, right? Like, there's just this weird thing with middle school. But yeah, you knew. I was like, no, we're not. Again, it was kind of like the elementary river of things that we were hearing, right? It just gets more intense when you're in middle school.
Yeah.
Everything gets more intense when you're in middle school.
Yeah. So.
Amen.
Yeah. That's just middle school.
It's just middle school. And that's like, I keep saying to people, like, these are 12-year-olds, like they're 11-year-olds. Like, they are going to be a little insane for a little while. Things get a little rough, you know, for all the kids.
So middle school was very different because in elementary school, it's just like randomized classes, right? You know, like 1 year I'd be with my best friend, 1 year I wouldn't be, right? And that's just how it was. But in my middle school, this is not the case at all middle schools, but there was like the honors classes. And so the honors classes very early on, I was like, oh, where'd all the Black and Latinx people go? You know, it's like, oh, well, they're in the classroom next door. And you just move around with this class all day. That was one thing that definitely kind of like struck me as a little bit different than what I've been used to in elementary school, which it was a very segregated system. It was obvious, right? Like every honors kid knew it. It was kind of a bit problematic because, it definitely took away from a lot of the people that you could have connected with and could have been friends with, since middle school is like the real time for that, you know, for making your friends. So I think that was kind of sad. But there were still classes that I had that were with everybody. But, you know, it definitely was something to note.
It was notable.
Yeah.
The tracking.
Well, you noticed it. I mean, I feel like that's, you know, the benefit of having been in your elementary school was you noticed it enough to be like, something is weird about this. Because like the system is set up to tell you that this is normal. This is the way things are supposed to be, and don't question it, right? And how about high school?
That's where all of them come together.
Okay.
It's all of it. It's everybody.
That's just back in the melting pot again. Even more so than elementary school. Like there are some classes where I'm like the only white kid in the class.
And to our school district's credit, I think starting when you were in middle school, they were starting to have these conversations about how are we doing in-school segregation as well.
They've gotten better at it, though.
Right.
It's
and I do
better.
think that
It has
they're
gotten a lot
making
better.
efforts to like start detracking students. And I think we're starting to see that in the high school, right?
Yeah.
So I will give our school district credit because I think that was the leaders. They made, equity a part of what they wanted to address.
Right.
And if you're going to address that, then you're going to have to look at how in-school segregation is playing out too.
There's some classes where I'm like the only white kid. And it is like an experience, to learn, because it's one that I've had, countless times. And now it's just like second nature. And that's like being the only white person in the room. And I think a lot of parents probably send their kids to private schools because they don't want that uncomfortable situation for their kids. And the truth is, if you're the only person of anything in a room, it's going to be uncomfortable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, how do you think people have been feeling throughout history, right? Like being the only woman in a room full of men, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even in politics, right? Look at the Senate, look at the House, right? It's like there's a handful of black people and it's like all white people. It's like, wow, like this is something that's real. It's something that happens. Sometimes you are just like the only person that's white in a room. And you have to learn how to be in that situation. And, spoiler alert, it's actually not that hard, right?
Surprise.
It's not.
You actually can just be in that space.
You can do it.
Yeah.
We're all human. We all like sports. We all
Right.
like, movies and stuff like that. It's not hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's actually like a skill. And unless the people are all like jerks and I have no problem being in that room,
Mm-hmm.
And
But in a room full of jerks, it doesn't matter what race they are.
doesn't matter.
That's the
Right,
problem, right?
correct.
It's not. It doesn't have to do with their race,
Nobody
right?
wants to do that.
Right. I mean, I do think there are so few white people who have that experience, and
Right.
and I think people are like terrified of it and think that it's got to be awful and debilitating. But like you said, it's actually you just get to be a person in a room. It's not actually a big deal.
Yeah, it's just a normal part of life. Yeah.
So it's clear that you all have a relationship and you've been talking about these things for a long time. Can you talk a little bit about how that started, how you maintain this open communication around these ideas?
Well,
How do we talk about race and difference? And
I think from a young age, you guys were like, well, how does it feel? Because they didn't have this experience in their schools, right? And they're like, well, how does it feel? I'm like, what do you mean?
But like school.
What am I supposed to? What am I supposed to be
talking about?
feeling? I think that really it's just easy to talk about it with you and Dad. You have prompted those conversations, and it's just easy. Once you've learned what people can look like, what people do, how they act, you realize that humans are all pretty similar. Even if you struggle with that, you don't want to be the only white person in a room. I would say just go into the room with that attitude, these people are not different from me in what they think and what they feel, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can assume that they're going to be pretty reasonable, just like me. I can assume that they're probably going to have a favorite movie, favorite color, just like me, right? If you go into that perspective, that humanist perspective, you will feel infinitely less uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I do think your schooling experience has allowed it. I mean, we talk about race, I feel like a lot. It comes up all the time because I think when you're living, even if the school district is so diverse and you're still living in a super segregated city. I mean, we see it all over the place. Like when we go eat at restaurants, it's crazy how even though our school district is like this, you can go out into the community. And we pointed out oh my goodness, there is only white people in this restaurant, right?
Yeah.
And we see it a lot. And I feel like your school experience has allowed us to talk openly about race and about privilege and the way it operates in your school and outside of the school.
I also think it just the experience of being in that school for 10 years, right, is just allowed me to think pretty simply about it, right? You and Dad, I'm not saying you're doing anything wrong.
No, but he does correct us on that.
I'm here for it.
They'll be talking about this, going on this really complicated rant about like, systemic racism. Like it's actually not that complicated. It's a pretty simple concept to get down. Even if you hear what people who are actually being oppressed and like, what they have to say about it, it really is just like pretty simple. Like it's not rocket science.
Right.
You could write it out on paper in about 3 seconds, right?
But yeah, it's such an important point. I think it makes Susan like that. You get this opportunity to then talk about it, and so you start talking about it from the time that he's 5, and now it doesn't feel like that big a deal, and you don't feel like, okay, like now's the time, he's turning 15, it's time to have the talk about race. And now like I've got to say all the things, I've got to say it all at once, I've got to convey all these complicated messages all in one like big major conversation. But if you're having them all along the way, then like I said, Elias, it's actually not that deep, Mom. Like it's cool. I get it.
But I also
I get it, yeah.
I think about how are white parents that aren't in this system, I don't understand how they're having that conversation. I really don't. I don't know how.
Well, and if they are having that conversation,
or
right?
even if they are, I'm
Right.
guessing that they're not, because I can't imagine how do you even have that conversation in that context? I don't know.
One of the narratives around why you can't have these conversations, and that's like the feelings of guilt and shame as a white person, specifically a straight white male. In the conversations that you've had in school or with parents, how do you navigate any of those? Do those ever come up? Is that just smoke and mirrors?
So making white people feel shame in my school is kind of like a joke. It's not really like an issue, right? Sometimes I have been put in that position where it's like, you are the only white male in the room, so people are going to be like, yeah, look at this white guy. What's he doing here? And you just kind of have to roll along with it, because you shouldn't feel shame in that moment, right? And maybe you shouldn't be like proud, but I've never felt that shame in my school. Like nobody's coming at you in the public schools. It's not like they're just like waiting around the corner for a white kid and just be like, oh, look at you, like this isn't. There's not like
you have things to learn and a life to live that doesn't involve you.
Right.
Yeah. Like you're not believe, and it's again like you're not the center of their attention, right? Like they've got bigger fish to fry. Yeah,
I appreciate that, because that's why states and municipalities are passing laws to not talk about some of these topics, because they don't want students to feel bad. I really appreciate your perspective.
Yeah.
It is a countercultural choice that you made. The reason that it felt like the draw of the river was so appealing was because you had to opt out. You had to choose to do something different.
Yeah.
What helped you stick with that? What helped you hold on to these sort of beliefs as you were making that choice, Susan?
I think one of the things was having a supportive partner who was very much aligned with me, and, in moments of weakness would be like the person who would say, no, we're not going to jump into that river. I think having a close group of friends who I had to find, who are aligned and who are making similar choices, who I trusted, because you do have conversations where you have to get vulnerable with people. I don't know. I think seeking out people who hold a similar value, who can also hold you to account, is really important. And I think I really do. I think integrated schools, and I wrote a blog about this, but on days where I would hear another super toxic smog story, just being able to go back to, I would just pick an episode, right? And just try to get my mind back right, because it can really mess with your brain. It can really mess with how you're thinking about a thing, or you see a thing.
Yeah.
It's very distorted.
Yeah.
And when so many people around you are kind of saying the same thing, you start to feel like you're the one losing your mind.
Right.
So I think having a close group of friends who share a value with you, and when we're struggling, we rely on each other and we hold each other to account and say, yeah, but, right, when we start going into those narratives. And I think I really do. I credit integrated schools, because there's just not much else out there.
Right.
You all have been like my sanity. I think that, and my partner, and so many other parents who to this day remain with us,
Right.
Has your social circle changed, or did you always have a diverse group of friends?
Yeah, it's definitely changed, because I do think it's natural, right, for parents to kind of hang out with the parents wherever your kids are going to school. Like that's something I've definitely seen, is we did have people who were in our social circle and then who made different choices, and then they got new friends.
Right.
And a lot of them are in our neighborhood, right? So we see them all the time, but it's like our relationship has completely changed. You know, we definitely advocate for public education. We definitely advocate for our public school district, because I think maybe Courtney McKitton talks a little bit about like the toxic smog that goes around. And then there's like waves that come, like if somebody decides to leave the district, they'll kind of try to bring the whole thing down with them on the way out, and just trying to like pull it back and say like, no, actually, but our school district is actually trying to accomplish like a really extraordinary thing. It is the one place in our community where we actually come together, like for real.
Right.
So I don't like seeing it like maligned or anything, because I think that it's actually what it's trying to do is quite extraordinary. And when you consider what it's trying to accomplish, it deserves our full respect.
Yeah.
You know, and the teachers there, you know, I think they're like teachers everywhere. There's some good teachers. There's teachers
That's
that
it.
aren't
That's going to be everywhere.
Yeah, maybe not as good. You know, when you're teaching a group of students that has that much need, it gets challenging, you know, and we are underfunded. Of course, you know, so there's just like, there's so many things, but even when I start feeling the pull, I don't feel it as much anymore, which is really nice. But I remember when he was in grade school and middle school, it got strong. And so I think that was one of the reasons that I wanted to come on here, is to say like, for people who are going through that, right? At that time, I just wanted to know, like, what does the future hold? What's this going to be like? Right?
Yeah.
And I couldn't fast forward it.
Right. Yeah. Right. You just have to play it out and see. Elias, were there like social costs to you? Do you feel like there were friends from the Montessori school or something that there was some like, oh, why are you going to that school? Or that there was some social costs to you to this choice?
Well, in my case, looking back on my friends in the Montessori school, they weren't very good friends. But, you know, I was able to make friends at the new school pretty easily.
You did lose some friends, though. I mean, your friends changed.
They did. Yeah, because a lot of them went to different schools. Yeah. I don't think I lost much socially. I mean, again, at the age of like 5, how much can you lose socially? You know, it's just like, oh, bye. You know, time for new friends.
Friend.
Yeah.
Like,
Hi, friend.
Whatever you lost, like what you gained on the other side of it was so much more valuable and worthwhile and meaningful.
Yeah. But do you also feel prepared to go on to a post-secondary, whether it's college or career life, going to this predominantly Black and brown high school?
Yeah, I definitely do. And especially one of these giant state schools that has like tens of thousands of kids. There's no way you're going to spend a single day where you're only talking to white people, right? And I think that that's something absolutely to consider preparing a kid for college.
So the high school now has brought a bunch of people back together, people who had Montessori, who had prep school, who had Catholic school, whatever, all sort of back together. You don't feel like you're academically behind or drowning or not able to keep up. I mean, I think that's one of the things that parents will often use as a justification for opting out, particularly at middle school, right? It's like, well, now, as Courtney McKitton used to say, like, middle school is where things get hairy, both literally and figuratively. And so, like, what, you know, the excuse will be, well, like, now the academics really count, and I don't want them to fall behind and then not be able to take, you know, whatever math class that's going to allow them to go to college or whatever. But you don't feel like you sort of lost out on some academic things from the schools that you went to?
Not at all. Actually, rather than me getting set behind, I think I was well in pace, and you know, even like maybe even more in pace with them in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the narratives that kind of freaked me out the most, right? And actually, now that he's here, and you know, we have statewide assessments, so you know how you're performing on average with other kids, right? And you haven't fallen behind academically at all. In fact, you've excelled. And I think that's like a testament to our school district and the teachers. So like, it's been the opposite.
Yeah.
Kids that have come from other schools are actually, they're the ones who are academically behind.
Yeah.
So,
and I think even like socially too, like, you know, if you are growing up around an all white community, you're not going to learn how to be in
I think that's another thing
white.
We've seen. Yeah. There are some kids that do transition into our school. I think,
and they just hang around the other kids that came from the same school.
That, or
like,
it's been socially hard. It's hard. That's a hard.
And I do want to like emphasize the message to parents here. Don't think, oh, then it's too late to send my kid to that school. I don't think that that's true at all. It's ideal to send somebody in the school from K through 12, but that's not always the case for a lot of people. And And I would say it's not too late. It might be a little bit hard, a little bit challenging to make new friends, but I do think it's worth it. It's something you have to adapt to, right? And I think people can do it, with the right mindset. They can absolutely fit into that school perfectly,
So what do you want to be when you grow up?
I don't know yet.
Well, if you decide to be a parent, I think you would be phenomenal at that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you.
Much. That's really sweet.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. My kids are going straight to the closest public school.
Well,
That's right.
Yeah.
He knows we've just
Stamp it.
Yeah.
That's it.
We've set that one.
Where's Grandma? Grandma doesn't exist. We chose the school.
Grandma's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Susan, how does it feel to be here? I mean, you're not done. Your work is not done. 10th grade,
it's not
there's still
done.
some time. But yeah, how does it feel to be kind of on the other side of the terror of it?
Again, it was not the school. It was not the students. It was the people around me that were really messing with my mind. And so right now I feel at peace. I feel at ease. I breathe a sigh of relief.
Yeah.
I think what I wasn't expecting tonight was to hear you tell my story and share the same things that I feel. So I just want to thank you both for naming these things so clearly that I have felt and experienced, and have also felt like, am I the only one who is feeling and noticing these things? So I really appreciate that. I thank you both.
Of course.
Yeah. And I appreciate this opportunity too.
Yeah, I'm really grateful to you both for being willing to share, for coming on, for having stuck with it. Elias, if my kids turn out like you, I feel like I'm doing well, and that is like because you're right, Susan. Like it's terrifying. You don't actually know if any of these things that you believe deeply in are going to actually pan out. And I've got a 13-year-old, and if in a couple of years she has similar things to say, I'll feel like, okay, this was all a win. So I'm really grateful to you both.
I recently read Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, and in it he writes that you should forget worrying about the past because you can't control the past. And you also really can't control the future. You can have these goals, but you can't actually control that you'll reach these goals. And I think, if you're worried about what's going to happen to your kids in the future, I think what you have to remember is that what you have is the present moment. That's what you have to work with, and that's what you have to make decisions with.
Yeah, we don't have that crystal ball.
Right. You have to do what you think you should be doing in the present moment. And if you have faith that the decisions you're making are right, I think that's what you have. You know?
You just got now. Yeah.
You just got now.
That's true.
And you have to take it as it comes.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Do
you
your
both.
best.
I'm just going to go cry in the corner.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
This is
fun.
so lovely. I don't want to leave.
So Val, what did you think?
I'm incredibly grateful for Susan and her husband and the conditions that they have created for Elias to experience something that I know deep down in my heart is valuable and worthy every single day, right? And choosing humanity over fear is something that really, really sticks with me from this particular story. The way in which throughout that conversation, Elias used like the pronoun we or our school, it demonstrated such a sense of ownership, such a sense of belonging that he felt there. It wasn't like he was visiting or doing anybody a favor, it's his community. And I think that's all I want for everyone everywhere, right? For them to be in a place where they feel like this is my community. This is ours. This is ours. And there's no one telling you like you don't belong here, whether it's our country or our city, that you can come and be a part of a place and feel that sense of collective ownership, like together, like we are in this together. There's many things that I'd left that conversation just really grateful for. But that was a big one for me because it didn't feel like Elias or his parents felt like they were doing Black people any favors, right?
Right.
you're actually here because you want to be here and you enjoy being here and you see the value in being here. And I think that's a really important message to convey as we talk about how to show up in this space.
Yeah. I mean, clearly Elias feels like he is part of that community. And the how we show up part of this work is so important, and not showing up as white saviors. There's a way in which they have approached this that feels like a good job of walking that line between, clearly Elias has gotten so much out of this, but it was not just a different form of opportunity hoarding. And clearly, like, I think their community is better off, their city is better off for them participating in it, but they didn't do it just to try to make the world a better place, right? Like, they did it because they wanted to be part of the community, and I think that they provide a great example of kind of walking that line.
Yeah. What feels important to emphasize over and over and over and over and over again is points where we have a sense of shared humanity. And I'm going to go back to what Susan said about listening to Nikole Hannah-Jones, and Nikole Hannah-Jones being in the midst of making that same decision for her child. And so when you talk about walking that line or not being a white savior, what I sensed from Susan was there was a real sense of like, here's someone like me experiencing this very same thing. Although we have different experiences, live in different places, certainly have different racial backgrounds, there's this thing that I can connect to that it's clear that Nikole Hannah-Jones understands what I am feeling right now. And that was the connection point. It wasn't a situation where there was a gathering of folks to say, like, how can we save this particular group without really understanding or being connected to or whatever. And so it's not lost on me that it was another mother's story that clicked for Susan.
Right. It's like the other stuff gets out of the way. The racial difference, the class difference are able to be set aside to see this shared. I am a parent who cares about the well-being of my kid and my community, and I'm grappling with this. And here is another parent who is doing the same thing. We share this, and those are the experiences that remind us that we have so much more in common than what separates us.
Yeah.
That's the promise of integrated schools, right? Is like our kids get to start doing this. So there was sort of a perfect confluence of events for Susan where Nikole Hannah-Jones, who's writing in the New York Times Magazine, who is able to present these ideas in a way that can really reach across boundaries, hits her at this moment where she is also grappling with this. And she's got her, social work training that's got her attuned to these things in the first place. And this sort of like perfect confluence of events that triggers this kind of chain reaction. But like, how much easier will that step be? I mean, Elias said right at the end, like, I know my kids are going to public school, like, or my mom's going to disown me. So he is set up even better to engage in this. And like Elias said, it's actually not that complicated, right? If we actually start on the path of we are all human, this like humanist perspective, that actually there's all these things that make us similar, that it's actually not that complicated, that we actually can find each other's shared humanity if we're in the spaces to do it.
In addition to academically being on track, having a greater sense of shared humanity, it was also clear how he was going to apply his experiences being in a diverse area to his work life, his professional life, his like adult life. This is what is going to be required of me, as I go to college, or what it looks like in the workplace. I'm going to work with people different from me, and I'm going to have to figure out how to do that. And I may be the only one in the room again. And I see value in that as well. And so he does make it seem so simple, right? Yeah. He makes it seem very simple. I am not surprised that Elias has had a good experience. And there's part of me that never wants other white families or privileged families to be surprised, that they've had a good experience at a school that is primarily Black and brown. And yet I people feel that way.
Right.
When we read research about the benefit of attending an integrated school, like we can process that logically. But there's so many lessons that Elias named that I wasn't expecting. And a significant one for me was his internalization of like the white male body not being centered. Yeah. And that everyone in the classroom space has equal value. And even recognizing that as young as early elementary school, right. When it went from hey, look at me and everything that I'm doing. Like, hey, Elias, you're one of the other kids here,
Right.
you know, and not to say that he wasn't attended to, but certainly Elias felt a shift in his own spirit. Like, oh, wait, it's not just about me here.
Right.
And how that can make a significant difference moving forward. And that part blew my mind.
It is reassuring, even for me, to see where Elias has landed after this experience. And obviously, everybody's experience is different in every school. This is one example. But my hope is that listeners will hear it and it will help turn down, as Anna Lauder from our leadership team often talks about, like the shark music, the sense of danger, the sense of fear that you talked about, that you can see an example of a kid who went to all the schools that I'm sure are poorly rated, that the white community has opted out of, and yet has ended up in this place, not just on track or maybe even ahead academically, but also with this great sense of shared humanity, also with this great sense of an appropriate space for him to fill in the world. I don't think you get to a school where everybody gets to say we about the school community, where everybody gets to feel like this is our community, unless everybody has a kind of like appropriate sense of how much space they're supposed to take up. And I think that is a big piece of what Elias got, starting in elementary school, is like the world doesn't revolve around you. You belong, but you belong in this sort of reasonably sized bucket, not in a bucket that is as big as the universe.
When you talked about the fear, like that the shark music, I can certainly recognize and hear that shark music if I'm putting my kids in a space where they might be the only Black children there, right?
Right.
Is that the same shark music that is playing, or is it different? Do we hear the same shark music when we talk about like the fears for our children and being in places that might be unfamiliar to them? I just imagine that one set of conditions feels genuinely dangerous
Right.
to like the soul of a young person, whereas others just are like perceived or fantasized danger.
Yeah.
And, that might not be fair. I don't know if that's fair, but
No, I think it totally is. And I have reflected on this as well. I think actually maybe in like episode 9, the only one, talking about my experience of being one of the, a small handful of white kids, like there were challenges to that for sure. There were ways in which I felt, other and had to work to find belonging. But it was between 8 and 4. In a society, in a country that was set up for me to belong in all the time. And even in that school was with largely white teachers and administrators who also, gave me a sense of belonging, and like school was a place for me. So I think the stakes are totally different. I think you're totally right. It's a tiny hint of what the experience of being the only one is like, but I don't think it's maybe the same shark music, but it's a very different size shark or something.
That makes sense.
Like everybody wants their kids to thrive. Everybody wants their kids to be okay. And I think that's where that kind of desire for the crystal ball that Susan talked about comes from, right? Is like, I want to know that what I'm doing is going to be right. And we never get to know, but like that desire for the crystal ball, I think, is also somewhat universal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was in a conversation with a parent who they have early elementary school kids. And they were talking about like just decisions regarding whether they should, black family, whether they should do a homeschool scenario and whether they should do like outside tutoring at one of the like tutoring agencies. They were dissatisfied like with the current math instruction specifically that their child was getting. They thought the social emotional was okay, but they were concerned about the math instruction. I have a junior and a sophomore, and I'm able to reflect and connect to those really deep feelings of anxiety around like, are we making the right choice? Right.
Yeah.
In the early days, like they are so weighty.
Yeah,
and
they feel so weighty.
Oh, they feel so weighty.
Yeah.
And I feel lighter about it now. And what I shared was, I'm very close to graduation. My kids have a path and we're close to that destination there. And, what I shared was, once they graduate, they'll go to college. Maybe they'll change their major a couple times. Maybe the major will be something that, they eventually work in. Maybe not.
Right.
But hopefully, like, they grow into wonderful adults. They find their people, they find themselves, and they're going to be okay. And I think that being where I am, I'm able to like rest a little bit because we've gone through so many of these other decisions, and each time they've been okay. You know,
Right.
we've made it. And it hasn't been without its bumps, and it hasn't been without like regrets. Like I wish this was different, or I wish this
Right.
teacher was different. Like all of those things have happened.
Can I just sit on that for 1 second? Because I think that is such an important part of it is like every decision is not going to be perfect. And that's okay, right? Like your kids are going to have a year where their teachers are not great. It's going to happen. That's not the end of the world, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that you did a bad job in like trying to decide where to send them. That is the nature of going to school. Some days are better than others. Some years are better than others. Some teachers are better than others.
Yeah. And what I told him is like, sure, choose the additional tutoring if that makes you feel good in this moment. And know that you can always choose again. Like this is not a permanent choice. So I would love for you to stay in public school, but if you decide to do homeschooling, you can choose again another time, right? Like that part, I wish I heard from parents who are a little bit ahead of me. Like if this right now in this moment is what will give you peace and quiet that voice and make you feel like you're not in shark-infested waters, there's other choices that you can make, and you can make, choices again and again and again.
Well, I love that. I literally was having a conversation this morning with a parent who's, thinking about choices for high school for her son. And, you would like to pick a high school for your kid to go to, but really what you're picking is where are they going to start ninth grade, right? Like if they start ninth grade and 2 weeks in, it's a disaster, you go somewhere else. If they get through ninth grade and it wasn't great, you pick somewhere else for 10th grade. And I loved when Elias said, like, it's not too late, right? Like, I am so grateful that I had this experience from the time that I was in kindergarten and could recognize that there wasn't just the skin-colored crayon, but actually skins come in all different colors. I'm so grateful that I had that. And if you didn't start then, it's okay. It's not too late. If you go in with the right attitude, you can make this choice at sort of any stage along your journey. I loved that.
Yeah, I did too. Thank you, Susan and Elias. Really giving me hope to kick off the new year.
Yes, absolutely. It is challenging times. I think, the need for community, as we said in the beginning, is strong. Susan mentioned that was kind of what helped her get through. Certainly, listeners, if you are looking for that community, you feel like you don't have it in your local context, see if there's an integrated schools chapter in your neighborhood. If not, maybe you want to start one. Maybe you just want to reach out and get connected more closely to the organization, join a book club, or get to know somebody here. We are always here looking to connect people. We have our caregiver connection program. We can connect you to another parent or caregiver who's in a similar situation. Go to the website, integratedschools.org, and just get closer to us as an organization. We are here for that.
That's right. Thank you for listening. And what we want to encourage you to listen and to share what you're learning, the things that you're feeling, the conversations that you're having. So don't just make this an isolated experience. Certainly share this with someone else in your community. And then call us, because you could very well be on an upcoming episode of Integrated Schools. We want nothing more than this to be a community-based podcast where you're not just hearing our voices, but you're hearing your voices as well.
Absolutely. Speakpipe.com/integrated schools, or go to our website, integratedschools.org, click on the leave us a voicemail button. We would love to hear from you, or just shoot us an email, podcast@integratedschools.org, and tell us your story. It doesn't have to be fully fleshed out. You've got some idea kicking around, some conversation you just had. We want to hear about it. My hope is that people found a lot that resonated with them in Susan's story. She is one mother, Elias is one son in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and yet there's so much from her story that I certainly resonated with, so much from Elias's story that seemed familiar and useful and valuable to me. And maybe you don't see that in your own story right now, but reach out. We'd love to talk about it, because we think there is so much universality in these stories that happen all around the country.
Yes. We encourage you to think about integrated schools as part of your giving efforts this year. So you can do that in 3 ways. You can simply go to our website and click the donate button. We take denominations of 1,000, 10,000, 100,000.
Whatever they come in.
You can also join our Patreon, where you'll get bonus content. And then we have a new feature, Integrated Schools Plus. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, there's an opportunity to get some additional content there with a small donation.
Yes, your support means the world to us, helps us keep the podcast going. As we wrap up here, thinking about where Elias left us with Marcus Aurelius's
Love it.
call to live in the moment. We can't control the past, we can't control the future, but we can make the best decisions we can in these moments. Certainly, it was the right decision to have Susan and Elias come on the podcast. Really grateful to them for doing it, and always feels like the right decision in the moment to be in conversation with you, Val. So,
Oh, you're gonna make me cry.
I'm grateful to be in this with you as I try to know better and do better.
Until next time.